Hi, my name's Elowen. Last Thanksgiving, I brought home a turkey and got handed an eviction instead. No warning, no kindness. Just a cold goodbye at the dinner table I paid for. But the worst part? That wasn't the beginning. It was years of silence, control, and quiet theft, until I finally said, enough. They thought I'd stay quiet. That I'd keep paying, keep bending, keep bleeding. So what really happened when I stopped? The last thing I expected was to be handed a verbal eviction notice while holding a warm casserole dish. I pulled into my parents' driveway, just as the late November sun dipped behind the church steeple at the far end of Ashbury's only Main Street. The sky was gray, the kind of color that made everything feel quieter. I parked carefully, as I always had, in the spot furthest from the porch, so Dad wouldn't say I was blocking his view of the mailbox. The pie box on the passenger seat had tipped sideways. I adjusted it and took a deep breath before heading up the steps. The wooden boards groaned under my boots, and for a second I almost turned around. Inside, the air was thick with the dry scent of overcooked turkey and burnt green bean casserole. It smelled like obligation. My father, Thayer, sat at the head of the table like he always did, arms crossed, face unreadable. Maribel, my mother, fluttered around with her usual fake busyness rearranging napkins that didn't need moving, opening and closing drawers like she was waiting for an excuse to be anywhere else. I set the pie on the counter next to the store-bought cranberry sauce I'd picked up on the way. No one looked up. No one said Happy Thanksgiving. Just the scrape of a fork across ceramic and the low hum of Thayer's old floor heater struggling against the cold. I pulled out a chair. No one told me where to sit, but that wasn't new. I'd grown used to being the extra limb no one asked for. I barely had time to place my napkin in my lap before Thayer cleared his throat and, without a glance, said, "You're too old to be freeloading. It's time you left." I thought I misheard. I looked up slowly. "What?" "You heard me," he said, slicing into the turkey like we were talking about the weather. "You've overstayed. It's time you got out." My fork hovered in midair. "I pay half the mortgage. I cover the internet, the gas bill, most of the groceries. Doesn't make this your home," he snapped. "Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a lifetime stay, princess." That word princess landed like a slap. I used to love it when he called me that. When I scraped my knees playing softball, he'd scoop me up and whisper, "My brave little princess." That was a long time ago. Now it was a weapon, a mockery. A reminder that I had once mattered, and now I was just a burden with a paycheck. I turned to my mother. She didn't meet my eyes, just stared down at her plate, chewing like she hadn't heard a thing. My throat tightened, but I didn't let the tears come. So that was the play. No warning, no discussion, just blindsided over stuffing and stale rolls. A silent conspiracy with polite smiles. "Is this because I didn't go to Aunt Lila's last week?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. "Because I had work?" Thayer scoffed. "Always with the excuses. Work, stress, your deadlines. You've been taking advantage of this family long enough." My jaw clenched. Taking advantage? I've been supporting this house while you've been, what? Drinking beer and watching reruns in your recliner? Maribel flinched, but still said nothing. "This isn't your house," he said, voice rising just enough to send a message. "We let you stay because we felt sorry for you. But sympathy doesn't pay rent." "Neither do you," I muttered. He slammed his fist on the table. The plates rattled. Enough. That was the end of it. There was no yelling match, no drama, just a verdict delivered between dry bites of turkey and fake gratitude. A cold declaration that I didn't belong and hadn't for a long time. I pushed my chair back, stood up slowly. The air felt heavier with every breath. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the pie still warm and placed it gently on the counter. No one moved. Not a thank you. Not even a glance. They didn't just kick me out, I thought. They planned this. Chose Thanksgiving because it made them look like the victims. I looked back once. Just once. Thayer had already gone back to carving the turkey. Maribel picked at her casserole like nothing had happened. "I guess we're doing this?" I said out loud, voice calm even. No one answered. Outside, the wind had picked up. I wrapped my coat tighter around me as I walked to the car. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't hitch. But inside, something cracked. I started the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. I looked up at the house I'd once believed was a home. The faded shutters, the sagging porch, the light flickering in the upstairs window where I used to do homework late into the night. They didn't just kick me out of the house, I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. They kicked me out of the illusion that I was ever really loved here. I drove off into the dark, headlights cutting through the silence. There were no bags packed in the trunk, no grand plan, just a woman who had finally seen the truth and wasn't afraid to leave it behind. I didn't hit the gas right away. I sat there, the heater hissing against the cold air that had crept in through the cracked door. My hands didn't tremble, but my chest felt tight like something invisible had snapped, and now all the pressure was flooding in. I didn't cry, not out of strength, out of clarity. I drove aimlessly for a while, down streets I'd known since I was a kid, passing darkened storefronts and flickering porch lights. The town looked the same, but everything inside me was shifting. The diner on Harlow Street still had its neon open sign lit, casting a weak red glow onto the slush-covered pavement. I pulled into a space but didn't go inside. I sat there, engine off, watching a couple through the window laughing over pie. They think they ended something tonight, I murmured. They don't know him just getting started. I stayed in the car until my fingers felt stiff from the cold. Then I texted the only person I could trust not to ask questions, Isolde. 10 minutes later, I was at her place. She didn't ask anything when she opened the door, just stepped aside and said, "The couch is yours." That was all I needed. Once she went to bed, I set my bag down and pulled out my laptop. The kitchen light hummed overhead, and the silence felt like armor. I logged in. Power bill, cancel. Water, cancel. Gas, click. The screen blinked before confirming deactivation. One by one, I unplugged every cord that had tethered me to that house, that life. I moved on to the bank account joint checking, the one Maribel insisted we open just for family emergencies. I remembered the way she'd smiled when I agreed, like it was love. It wasn't, it was leverage. I transferred the funds to my private account, one I'd quietly opened last spring when I felt the first real shift in their behavior. I left them nothing. Then came the cars. Both still insured under my policy, because it made sense, because I was good with money, because that's what family does for each other. I removed both vehicles, confirming they'd be uninsured by Monday morning. I didn't flinch. With every confirmation click, I wasn't just walking away, I was extracting myself, cell by cell, from their narrative. I wasn't doing this to hurt them. I was doing this to reclaim what I gave without being asked, what they assumed belonged to them by default. I paused only once, staring at the utility history. Years of payments made from my account. Hundreds of dollars drained each month while Thayer sat in his recliner barking at game shows, and Maribel thumbed through catalogs she never ordered from. They said I was freeloading. I was the damn backbone. A memory slammed into me, uninvited. Me on the roof in a thunderstorm last spring, nailing shingles down while Thayer yelled out the window about how I was doing it wrong. My jeans soaked, my fingers numb. He never came out to help, just cracked open another beer and turned up the volume. Another one. Maribel calling me from a ditch, sobbing because she slid off the road. Her tires had been bald for months. I paid for the replacements, took a personal day, covered the toe. None of that was remembered tonight. None of it bought me a seat at their table. I didn't feel regret, just rage that had cooled into precision. I scrolled through the online accounts, highlighting each with a sense of finality. Netflix under my name, cable, Wi-Fi, gone. I could already hear Maribel screaming when her shows didn't load. I hoped she called the provider and heard, in a robotic voice, that the account was closed by the primary holder. Every severed tie wasn't petty. It was power coming home to roost. I took a break to drink water straight from the tap, leaning against Isolde's counter. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and soap. Her cat watched me from the hallway, tail flicking, silently judging. I sat back down and opened the last item, the emergency account. The one I used to think made me noble. Selfless, family-oriented. The same account they quietly drained over the years, always with a good excuse. I froze it. Not deleted, just locked behind a wall of paperwork and identity verification they wouldn't navigate even if they tried. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I typed a single note in the memo section of the final transaction. They never saw it as help, just expected support. But I'm not their backup plan anymore. I closed the laptop, the faint click echoing louder than it should in the small kitchen. They kicked me out, but I walked away with everything that actually mattered: my autonomy, my choices, my voice. And now they'd feel the void I used to fill so quietly. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay on Isolde's couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent and cat fur, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room was the only sound. But in my mind, it was noisy memories clawing their way out, like they'd been waiting for the silence. By morning, my eyes were dry but heavy. I sat up slowly, wiped my face, not from tears, but from the weight of things I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Coffee was already brewing in the kitchen. Isolde had left a sticky note on the counter. "Take what you need. I've got you." I poured a cup, sat back down with my laptop, and pulled up an old folder I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside it was an email marked Denver offer. I remembered the day it came in like it had happened just last week. A 6-figure salary, a leadership position at a marketing firm I'd admired since grad school, relocation assistance, health benefits that made my eyes water, everything I had worked toward for nearly a decade. I'd even packed a suitcase. I'd mapped out apartments within walking distance of the office. I'd started dreaming, and then Maribel cried, "If you leave, your father will spiral. You know how he gets when you're not around." She sat on the edge of my bed, trembling. Real or performed, I couldn't tell. She clutched the frayed sleeve of her robe like it was a life raft. "You're abandoning us," she whispered, "right when we need you most. And Thayer?" He didn't say a word. But the next morning, my car wouldn't start. The battery had been unplugged. I found the cable lying in the grass under the hood, like someone didn't even try to hide it. I never made it to the interview. I never left. I told myself I'd reapply, wait for the next opening. But life, as they say, got in the way, and guilt, well, it never left. Sitting there now, cup warming my hands, I opened a second folder. This one held documents from last year, the time I tried to buy my own place. Loan denied. I hadn't understood why at first. My credit had always been decent, and my debt manageable. But when I pulled the report, there it was. A credit card I didn't remember opening. It was under my name, but the authorized user? Maribel. The balance? Just under $9,000. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. "You make more than us," she said, eyes wide, like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's not like we bought a yacht, we needed help. That's what family does." "But you didn't ask," I said, voice shaking. She rolled her eyes. I didn't think I had to. I had paid off the card in silence. Not because I forgave her, but because the damage was already done. The house I'd wanted, gone. The interest rate spike, permanent. They didn't need to slam doors or scream insults. They just quietly clipped my wings until I forgot I had any. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dinner skipped, every birthday I spent working, every weekend spent fixing a leaky sink or negotiating with the electric company was rewritten in their minds as expected. Gratitude was never on the table, only expectation. I looked back at the email, the one from Denver. I'd saved it, even after I turned the offer down. I guess some part of me needed the reminder that I had once been wanted for more than my usefulness. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I thought I was being loyal, but loyalty built on fear isn't love, it's servitude." That line lingered in the room long after I said it. It hung in the air, soft but final. I leaned over and grabbed my phone, opened the credit monitoring app, and checked the latest report. The damage was still there, but smaller now. Manageable, fixable, and it was mine to fix. No one else would be touching it again. I scrolled through photos on my phone, landed on one from 4 years ago, standing beside the old Christmas tree, holding a mug, fake smile plastered on, while Thayer stared at the TV and Maribel unwrapped the present I had bought for her, pretending it was from him. That night, I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why I still felt invisible. They took years from me. But they don't get tomorrow. Not anymore. The sun had just begun to slip behind the low rooftops of Ashbury when I sat down at the kitchen table in Isolde's apartment, with a yellow legal pad and a dull pencil. The evening light pooled across the hardwood floor, soft and amber, but I barely noticed it. I was deep in the kind of focus that only comes after a heartbreak you've accepted, not one you're trying to outrun. I'd already cut the cords, the utilities, the credit lines, the joint insurance, all severed, but something kept nagging at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't reach. A hunch, or maybe just experience whispering, "You missed something." So I started listing every account I'd ever had with my name on it alone or shared. Cell phone, yes. Auto loan handled. Bank. That's where I paused. The joint checking account. I hadn't used it in almost a year. I'd moved most of my savings to a personal account after the credit card mess with Maribel. But that backup account still had both our names on it. I'd left it open, partly out of habit, and partly because if I am being honest, I still hadn't fully let go. I pulled it up online, entered the login I hadn't used in months, and there it was. A charge for $340 at a liquor store on the edge of town, another for $112 at a tire shop, a $29 recurring gym membership fee. I stared at the screen in silence, my pulse flattening, not rising. This wasn't rage. It was recognition. Thayer hadn't been to a gym since I was in high school. The last time he worked out, I still had braces and thought Friday night pizza meant we were bonding. And the tire shop? That wasn't even the one I used to go to. It was his. Always had been. I clicked further back. More withdrawals, more patterns. The account I thought of as inactive was anything but. It had become his personal piggy bank, my name still tied to the account, my silence mistaken for consent. And then it clicked. I remembered the night we opened that account. I was 26, just landed my first full-time job. Thayer had said, "Every family needs a backup, in case of emergencies." He insisted my name be listed as the primary, said he didn't trust himself to stay organized. Back then, I believed it was his version of transparency. Now I saw it for what it was, a carefully staged handover of control masked as vulnerability. When I brought it up last year, just gently, not accusing, he'd scoffed. "It's all family money, Elowen. Don't be dramatic. You act like we're stealing." And I'd let it go, because that's what they'd trained me to do, question myself first. Now I was done questioning. I grabbed my purse, keys, and headed for the credit union down on Main Street. It was a short drive, but I took the long way looping past the library, the old diner, the pharmacy with the flickering neon sign. Ashbury didn't change much, but I had. The woman at the bank recognized me. Her name tag read, Denise. She greeted me like I was still the girl who used to drop off deposit slips for Maribel when I was a teenager. "I need to freeze a joint account," I said, voice calm, "and remove a co-holder." Denise blinked. "Family account? Not anymore." The process was straightforward. ID, digital signature, a form or two. I changed the email address, requested a new card, and canceled the old one. Denise didn't ask why, but when she handed me the receipt, she said, "Sometimes doing what's right for you means leaving people behind who never saw you in the first place." I walked out into the chill evening air and didn't look back. Back at Isolde's, I scribbled a note to myself on the same yellow legal pad. They made plans with money that wasn't theirs. Now they'll learn what empty means. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't revenge. It was release. Just past midnight, my phone buzzed a text alert from the bank. Auto withdrawal failed. Insufficient funds. I smiled, not in cruelty, but with peace. I didn't scream. I didn't warn them. But now they'd know I was done being their fallback plan. I woke to the buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. A groggy glance told me it was 6:17 a.m. The sun hadn't cracked through the blinds yet, but the calls had already started. 8 missed calls, 2 voicemails, no texts, just silence wrapped in noise. I didn't need to listen to know who it was. Thayer always called first thing in the morning when he wanted to catch me before I got in one of my moods, as he liked to phrase it. That usually meant before I'd had time to think for myself. Maribel? She preferred voicemails, long ones, drenched in trembling tones and words like betrayal, family, and disappointment. I tapped play on the first one. Her voice slid out of the speaker, syrupy and tight. "We're still your family, Elowen, no matter how mad you are. Please, baby, just call back. We can work this out. We always do." "No, you just pretend nothing happened until I forget why I was angry." That's not resolution. That's erasure. The second voicemail, predictably, was Thayer's. I hope you're proud of yourself, turning your back on blood. You think money makes you right? You'll regret this. Don't say I didn't warn you. There it was. Love, laced with a threat. I deleted both voicemails without saving them. No hesitation. My thumb didn't even shake. Then I texted Isolde. They're panicking. I'm not. She replied with a single word. Progress. I stayed in bed a little longer, watching the ceiling fan spin in slow circles, thinking about how many years I'd spent chasing their approval. Every phone call I'd answered on the first ring. Every plane ticket booked last minute for family emergencies that turned out to be guilt traps. Every weekend, I canceled plans just to be present for people who only ever noticed when I was useful. Not anymore. That afternoon, I met Calum for coffee. He was back in town for a short visit, and catching up felt like another small reclamation of my own life. We found a booth in the back of the caf, warm light spilling from the Edison bulbs overhead. You look good, he said. Lighter. I'm trying to be, I replied, offering a small smile. It's been a month. He nodded, sipped his latte, then paused. I ran into Micah a couple weeks ago. I blinked. Micah. 2 years ago, I thought I was going to marry that man. Then he disappeared. No argument, no explanation. 1 week we were apartment hunting, the next he was gone. Calum didn't notice my hesitation. He mentioned something weird, he continued, eyes cautious. Said your mom told him you were unstable, that you were struggling financially and might drag him down. It felt like someone poured ice water straight into my lungs. What? He said she cornered him at a farmer's market, told him you had unresolved issues, that he deserved someone more stable, more grateful. I couldn't speak. I just stared down into my untouched tea, hands frozen. I'd spent months blaming myself. I thought I'd pushed him away, been too guarded, too closed off. I believed in the quiet of my worst nights that maybe I wasn't worth loving, that maybe I had ruined it. And all this time it wasn't me. It was her. Maribel had gone behind my back not to protect me, not out of concern, but to sabotage something good. Something that would have made me more independent, harder to control. Are you okay? Calum asked softly. I nodded once. Thanks for telling me. I needed to know. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call Micah or write a scathing letter to my mother. I wrote a message, not to send, just to write. If someone shows you they're willing to ruin your happiness to keep you dependent, believe them. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was true. And it was the kind of truth I'd spent too many years avoiding. I copied the sentence into my notes app, titled it Rules for My Future. A new section in a life I was rewriting, one honest line at a time. At 9:43 p.m., another voicemail came in. I watched the phone ring, didn't flinch, didn't even open the app to listen. I blocked both numbers, not out of anger, out of clarity. They'd had my attention for decades. Now they had my silence. And silence? Silence is a decision, not a retreat. I stood by the window, looking out over the sleepy street below. Somewhere in that quiet, I felt something shift, not loudly, not with fireworks or applause, but with finality. They played their cards. Now it was my turn, and I wasn't bluffing. The next morning came quietly, no calls, no buzzing from blocked numbers. For the first time in weeks, my phone felt like mine again, until a notification popped up from an unexpected place. Facebook. It wasn't a friend request or a memory alert. It was a message with a screenshot, sent from someone I barely spoke to in town. Hey, saw this and thought you should know. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. There, in full view of hundreds, maybe thousands, was a post from Thayer in the Ashbury community group, a public thread, a pity-fueled monologue. Some daughters forget who raised them, were sick, hungry, abandoned. I never thought the child I poured my life into would leave her aging parents in the cold. There were dozens of comments already. Old neighbors, church folks, former co-workers of his. So sorry, Thayer. Praying for healing. Kids these days have no heart. If you need anything, let us know. I stared at the screen, unmoving. It wasn't just a Lee, it was a trap. A manipulation masterpiece painted in vulnerability and weaponized shame. I whispered aloud, voice flat but sure. They're using sympathy as a shield. Ill-use facts as a sword. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone or pace the room. Instead, I reached under the bed for a storage box I'd quietly added to over the years. Labeled in permanent marker, receipts, literal and metaphorical. I opened my laptop and spread the contents across the Bedivere utility bill from the past 6 years in my name. Auto payments, gas and water, cell phone statements, repair receipts from the winter the pipes burst, and I was the one who paid for emergency service, not Thayer. I copied scans into a folder, labeled each image by date. Bank transfers? Documented. Checks written from my account to theirs? Screenshotted. Emails from Maribel asking for just a little help this month because they were short again? Saved. I didn't just build a response. I built a timeline. A picture that showed who had really been abandoned and by whom. At 1:13 p.m., I posted. No flourish, no rage, just facts. I've stayed quiet out of love. But since this story's now public, let me clarify a few things. Then I laid it out. Paid electric bill. $187.42 under my name. Car insurance, 2 vehicles. Drafted monthly from my checking emergency roof repair. Covered in full by me last December food, medical co-pays, even dog grooming for a pet they wouldn't let me name I ended with. They didn't lose a daughter. They lost the person who kept their lights on. It wasn't venomous. It was surgical. A neighbor named Darlene commented within minutes. I saw her patching that roof in the freezing cold. He just yelled from inside not to drop the hammer again. Then another post from someone who used to run the pharmacy. She always picked up their meds, paid in cash. No one ever mentioned that part. Like a tide, the narrative began to shift. Ashbury was small. Reputation ran deeper than blood. People remembered who shoveled their sidewalks in winter, who offered rides when someone's car broke down, who kept their head down and carried burdens no one asked about. I never asked for this war, but they brought it to my front porch and rang the doorbell. So I answered with proof. By nightfall, my post had more engagement than Thayer's ever did. Not that it mattered. He didn't post again. Neither did Maribel. Their silence online echoed the silence I now maintained in real life. I didn't respond to comments. Didn't ride the wave. I'd said what I needed to. That was enough. The house I grew up in? The image of it no longer hurt. Not because I'd forgiven, but because it no longer controlled the narrative of who I was. At 11:47 p.m., I turned off notifications, closed my laptop, and sat in the dark with a mug of tea in hand. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me. Not anymore. There's a silence that comes from being ignored, and one that comes from choosing not to engage. I had chosen the second. They'd painted me as cruel, cold, disloyal, and I had replied not with venom, not with sob stories, but with the truth. If they wanted a war, they were about to see I came with receipts. The envelope was there when I opened the door, a manila slab of silence left at my feet like a threat that didn't need words. No knock, no courier. Just wait. I didn't open it right away. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared. The last time I'd seen my name typed that formally was a college acceptance letter. This time, it was bolded on legal letterhead. Plaintiff Thayer and Maribel Connors. Defendant, Elowyn Connors. Allegations, elder neglect, financial exploitation, emotional cruelty. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they'd finally outdone themselves. After everything they took, twisted, taunted, they now wanted the system to clean up the story they'd made a mess of. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted revenge dressed in Sunday best. I whispered into the empty room, "They've gone nuclear." And I knew what that meant. I had to meet them there. By noon, I was on a Zoom call with legal aid in St. Louis. The woman who picked up Kay had kind eyes and a sharp tone. She transferred me to Jace, a paralegal who looked young enough to still be paying off undergrad loans, but had the steel nerves of someone who'd seen messier family implosions than mine. He listened without interrupting, scanned the PDF ID uploaded before the call even connected, scrolled silently, then looked back up at me through the screen. "Elowyn," he said, "this isn't just defense. This is a counterattack waiting to happen. We worked fast. Every folder I'd created financial records, screenshots, dates, times became ammunition. Every please help email from Maribel, every just cover it this time Venmo memo, even the Facebook thread, which had since been deleted but screen captured in full. We filed our motion within the week, counterclaim defamation, malicious prosecution, misuse of shared financial accounts. The court date was set. A month later, I stood in a courthouse that smelled like old carpet and cold metal. My name echoed through the hallway as they called the case. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I walked in wearing the only suit I owned, hair pulled back, documents in hand. Thayer was already there, sitting like a pastor about to deliver a sermon. Maribel clutched tissues she didn't need yet. Theatrics came early in their show. They brought binders. My team brought facts. When the judge called for opening statements, Thayer's attorney stood and introduced Exhibit A screenshots of alleged texts between me and my father. Messages that proved I knew about their financial suffering. Messages that confirmed I'd refused to help. Messages where I apparently typed, "You two deserve to rot. You got what you had coming." I didn't even blink. My lawyer, Carmen, didn't object immediately. She waited, let the courtroom sit in that lie for exactly 9 seconds, then said, "Your Honor, we ask to introduce Exhibit C." Jace stood, wheeled a small monitor to the front, and tapped the screen. Metadata, file path logs, app overlay detection, translation for the room. Those messages? Created in a fake texting app, time-stamped 2 weeks ago, not pulled from a phone, built from scratch. Gasps filled the room. Maribel finally used the tissue. The judge asked for silence, then slammed his gavel. Thayer's face didn't flinch, but his lawyer began sweating. The rest of the hearing blurred into specifics. Depositions, bank account audits, witness testimonies, screenshots backed by receipts. By the end, the judge didn't issue a ruling, said he needed more time. But the room had already shifted. Outside the courthouse, the October wind hit harder than I remembered. But it was clean. Honest. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Jace joined me on the steps. "You know," he said, "a lot of people don't fight back. They just try to survive the noise." "I didn't have that luxury," I said. "They made this war public. I made the truth louder." He nodded. "That's the thing about family. When they lie long enough, they forget some of us learned how to write things down." We didn't shake hands. Didn't need to. I walked back to my car with no need for closure, just a next step. Because the court saw the truth. But now it was time for everyone else to feel it. By the time I got back to Isolde's, my boots were soaked, my fingertips cold, and my thoughts sharper than they'd been in weeks. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. Instead, I dropped my coat, rolled up my sleeves, and opened my laptop. The courtroom had seen the truth. That wasn't enough. Not for a town that lived on gossip, not for a family that only cared when someone else was watching. So I created a folder, Google Drive, public link, titled it, "Since They Want to Talk Publicly, Here's the Full Story." There was no commentary, no dramatic captions, just cold, verifiable facts. Screenshots of mortgage payments in my name, property tax stubs signed by me, the auto-renew notices for their health insurance, the service contracts for plumbing, roofing, pest control. The old voicemail from Maribel sobbing because Thayer had lost track of rent again and ID paid it to keep the power on. All of it. I organized the files by year. I timestamped everything. No manipulation, just documentation. Then I posted the link on the same Ashbury community group where Thayer had weaponized Facebook weeks ago. That was it. No quote, no emojis, no hashtags. Truth doesn't need decoration. I closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen to boil water. By the time the kettle whistled, my phone buzzed with the first ping of notification. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I poured tea, added honey, and waited. Not for their response, but for the silence that would come after. The next morning, I woke to over 24 missed calls. But it was the headline on my feed that stopped me mid-sip. Ashbury family drama goes viral, daughters' docs spark town-wide reckoning. The article didn't quote me, didn't need to. It quoted the receipts. I scrolled further and saw a video. Maribel, shaky camera, dim kitchen light behind her, casting too much shadow. She clutched a tissue and spoke with that voice soothing, motherly, almost believable. "We're just hurt," she said. "She's our daughter. We didn't know she felt that way. We never meant to hurt her." She sniffled, dabbed at a dry cheek. It was all love. Maybe we got it wrong, but it was love. The comments came fast. "Then why lie about her in court? Love doesn't sue. Sounds like you're sorry you got caught." Someone reposted my Google Drive link right beneath the video. No caption, no insult. Just a hyperlink, like a mirror held up to a mask. By noon, the ripple had become a wave. Thayer was quietly removed from the church volunteer board. I heard through Isolde that the pastor had called it a conflict of spiritual integrity. Maribel's bridge club canceled the next game, then the next month's, then sent her a message. We're rotating hosts. We'll let you know if we need anything. I didn't cheer. This wasn't a win. It wasn't revenge. It was air returning to a space that had long been suffocating. Isolde texted, "This is the quiet part, right? Where you breathe again?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back, "It's where I stop bleeding." I meant it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt level. Later that afternoon, I took a walk through downtown. The breeze had lost its bite. The trees were in that golden phase before bare branches, flame-colored and fleeting. I passed the library where I used to volunteer, the diner where I'd once met Micah, the hardware store Thayer never paid for when I bought him new tools he never used. No one stopped me. No one whispered. People nodded. One woman even offered a small smile. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like arrival. I paused at the crosswalk, watching the light change, and I thought not about them, but about me. Who was I, now that they no longer defined me? Not just the girl who kept the lights on, not the daughter who stayed too long, someone rebuilding from rubble but not bitterly, not desperately, intentionally. They lost a daughter who stayed quiet for too long. Now I had to decide what kind of woman I wanted to become. The apartment was small, the kind with crooked baseboards and paint that didn't quite reach the corners, but it was mine, entirely mine. I signed the lease with a pen that barely worked and didn't care. The duplex was tucked into an older block just east of downtown St. Louis. It had a view of a half-dead elm tree and a laundromat sign that flickered when it rained. The windows stuck in the mornings, and the shower had exactly one pressure setting aggressive. But when I turned the key and stepped inside for the first time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Whole. Like it opened a book and the pages hadn't been dog-eared yet. The first thing I unpacked was a tiny bookshelf I'd carried from apartment to apartment since college. I lined it with cookbooks I rarely used, old journals I never reread, and one worn novel I always returned to when I didn't know who I was. Then came the coffee maker. Brand new, black matte. Cost more than I should have spent, but worth every cent. The first pot smelled like cinnamon. Not because of any special blend, just because I'd added it to the grounds. Because I could. Because no one was standing over my shoulder telling me it was a waste, or asking why I didn't use the money for something useful. This place didn't just look different. It felt untouched by them. A week passed quietly. I found myself opening the blinds more, walking barefoot on the creaky tile, taking long showers just because I could. I stopped checking my phone every hour. And that's when the email came. A neighbor back in Ashbury, someone I barely knew, sent a short message. "Lights haven't been on at your parents' place for days. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't answer right away. I let it sit in my inbox while I folded laundry and organized my closet. But later, curiosity tugged. I clicked the email open again and scrolled through the forwarded thread. There were whispers. Thayer had been denied a loan at the local credit union, tried to refinance something. Maybe the house. Denied flat. Rumor was, his credit was a mess. Maribel had been seen at a second-hand shop downtown trying to sell jewelry. Pieces I recognized from family photo skiffs I'd bought her over the years, when I still believed buying love was better than having none at all. No one defended them this time. Not the neighbors, not their friends. They'd run out of goodwill, out of stories, out of daughters to hide behind. I didn't gloat. That was never the point. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone. I didn't want them destroyed, just disconnected. There was a difference. That evening I dug through a box labeled Thanksgiving stuff that Isolde had helped me pack. Tucked in between old cloth napkins and a cracked gravy boat was the plastic cake topper from last year. The one I'd bought when I tried to make dessert feel celebratory, even as the house turned cold. I turned it over in my hand once, then dropped it in the trash. Gone. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a maple leaf I'd pressed between two books weeks ago. Burnt red, curled at the edges, still beautiful. I taped it into my journal, wrote one sentence beneath it. This year, I gave thanks for myself. Simple, whole, enough. The next day, I confirmed a job interview with a nonprofit downtown. Something small, communications work, nothing flashy but meaningful. Mine. Isolde and I made dinner plans for Friday Thai food and bad reality TV. I hadn't reread a single voicemail in over a week. I no longer waited for the apology that would never come. No longer paused when I heard my mother's ringtone echo from a stranger's phone. They weren't villains in my life anymore. They weren't anything. I didn't forgive them. Not entirely. But I no longer built my days around their ghosts. They'd raised a daughter who stayed too long, who gave too much, who mistook silence for peace and control for love. But they made a woman who left. And that woman? She built something better without them. Even now, with the dust settled and the noise gone, I don't look back in anger, I look back in clarity. I used to think silence made me strong, that surviving quietly was noble, but survival is not the same as living. And no one, not even your parents, has the right to define your worth or weaponize your loyalty. I didn't walk away because I hated them. I walked away because I finally loved myself enough to stop bleeding for people who kept handing me the knife. And maybe that's the hardest part. Realizing that healing doesn't mean getting an apology. It means choosing yourself anyway. So if you're watching this, and you've ever felt trapped, dismissed, or erased by the people who were supposed to love you the most, I see you. I've been you. And I'm telling you, there's life on the other side. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would never hurt you? Do you believe setting boundaries makes you cruel or courageous? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this story hit close to home, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this truth travels. And if you didn't like this video, that's okay too. Tell me why. Let's talk about it. This space is for real stories and real people. If this story made you feel seen, inspired, or just a little braver, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. You never know who might need to hear your story next. Hello, my name is Lynn, and for most of my life, my parents called me the hopeless one. They bragged about my brother, praised him in front of everyone, while pretending I was invisible. They even threw a party at a vineyard, laughing behind my back, never realizing the vineyard belonged to me. But worse than the insults was the quiet betrayal. The years they drained my trust, my savings, my heart. How far would family go to tear you down, just because they never believed you could rise? The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden haze over the vineyard, stretching shadows across the manicured rows of vines. I stood near the edge of the gravel parking lot, watching as the family trickled in, oblivious to the fact that every stone, every leaf in this place belonged to me. Frank, my father, stepped out of his silver SUV first, smoothing his thinning hair and adjusting his sunglasses as if he were about to walk a red carpet. Claudine, my mother, followed right behind, fanning herself dramatically even though it wasn't that hot. And then there was Dorian, my younger brother, practically glowing with self-satisfaction, dressed like he had just walked out of a business magazine shoot. They didn't notice me right away. They were too busy marveling at the place, making comments loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Now this," Frank said, slapping Dorian on the back. "This is class. Only the best for my son's birthday, huh?" Claudine let out one of her theatrical sighs. "Just imagine, Dorian," she cooed. "One day you'll have a place like this under your name, not some whatever it is your sister's doing." I smiled tightly and approached, smoothing the front of my sundress. No one offered a greeting. No one even made eye contact. I wasn't surprised. The party was already buzzing. Long tables had been set with crisp white cloths, bottles of wine lined up like soldiers, and a massive cake with Dorian's face airbrushed on it stood at the center of attention. Photos of Dorian, childhood, graduation, faux-candid shots in tailored suits were scattered everywhere. My name, my face, nowhere to be seen. I grabbed a glass of water from the service table, choosing to stay back, half listening as Claudine played hostess. "Isn't Dorian just the golden child?" she gushed to an older couple from the neighborhood. "We always knew he'd make something of himself. Not everyone has the ambition, you know. Some are better suited to simpler lives." Her eyes flickered toward me. A calculated glance, a loaded smile. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I wanted to respond. God, how badly I wanted to. But I forced myself to smile politely and moved closer to the rows of grapevines, letting the conversation wash over me like acid rain. The speeches began an hour later, after everyone had had enough wine to pretend the tension wasn't thick enough to cut with a knife. Frank cleared his throat loudly and tapped his glass with a butter knife. "If I could have your attention," he bellowed, "I'd like to say a few words about my son." I stood frozen at the edge of the group, my hands clasped so tightly behind my back that my knuckles ached. "Dorian's ambition, his drive, well, it makes a father proud," Frank continued, voice booming over the crowd. "He's a man who knows how to get things done. Not everyone can say that about their kids." Another sideways glance at me, like a punch thrown with a silk glove. Polite claps scattered through the crowd. A few awkward smiles. No one knew where to look. I kept my head high, my smile just a hair's breadth from cracking. My chest burned with humiliation, but I didn't move. I refused to give them the satisfaction. The evening sunlight deepened into a soft amber glow, the air cooling slightly. Servers bustled about, offering canapés and refilling champagne flutes. Conversations hummed, glasses clinked, a picture-perfect celebration if you ignored the undertones of cruelty lacing every other word my parents spoke. A sharp, familiar ache pressed against my ribs. A memory resurfacing. How many birthdays, graduations, milestones had I stood just like this, on the sidelines, smiling through the ache, pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. Frank raised his glass one final time. "Here's to a future we can all believe in," he said. His meaning was clear. A future without dead weight, without me. I watched the others raise their glasses, their faces a blur of forced celebration. I set my own glass down, untouched, and took a slow breath. For now, I chose silence. Not because I was defeated, but because I was planning. Because somewhere deep inside, a small voice, a voice that had been ignored for too long, whispered clearly, "Not this time." The glass still sat abandoned on the edge of the long table, catching the last bit of light like a forgotten promise. I stepped away from the crowd, each footfall deliberate, weaving between pockets of laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. My chest was tight, not from the wine I hadn't touched, but from the unbearable weight of pretending. Near the far edge of the vineyard, where the vines thickened and the noise of the party thinned into a muted hum, I raised my phone to my ear. The screen was dark. I wasn't calling anyone. I just needed an excuse to be alone for 5 minutes without having to explain myself. The breeze shifted slightly, bringing with it the scent of earth and ripe grapes. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, trying to steady the tremor that had taken root in my hands. Behind me, faint but still clear, I caught snippets of my mother's voice. "Honestly," Claudine said with a sugar-sweet lilt that never fooled me, "not everyone's cut out to succeed. Some people are better off marrying well, you know, finding a nice, stable husband, settling down instead of whatever it is Lynn thinks she's doing." A few women tittered awkwardly. No one corrected her. No one defended me. The words didn't hit like a slap anymore. No, they sank deeper, settling into old wounds that never quite healed, no matter how thick a skin I thought I had built. The breeze carried me backward in time, whether I wanted it to or not. I was 16 again, standing in our cramped kitchen, clutching a sketch pad full of designs I had poured my heart into. Frank barely glanced at it before muttering, "Dreams are fine, but real life needs something sturdier than crayons and pipe dreams." Claudine had simply smiled, that same brittle smile, and said, "Maybe focus less on silly drawings and more on finding someone to take care of you, sweetheart." It had been the same song and dance through my early 20s. When Dorian flunked out of his second job, after wrecking my father's old truck and racking up debts he couldn't explain, it was me who emptied my savings to cover the costs. They hadn't even said thank you. Frank had just clapped Dorian on the back and told him, "Everyone makes mistakes, son. You'll bounce back." Mistakes, it seemed, were only forgivable if you were the right child. My phone buzzed uselessly in my hand, jarring me back to the present. I slid it into my purse and turned around just as Frank's voice rose above the party noise. "Let's all raise a glass," he bellowed, holding his champagne high. "To Dorian, the pride of this family. Thank God we have him, or who knows where we'd be." A ripple of laughter passed through the guests, some genuine, some strained. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I could practically hear the unsaid words underneath. Thank God we don't have to rely on Lynn. My mother beamed up at Frank like he had just delivered a state address. Dorian laughed and tipped his glass at the crowd, his Rolex catching the setting sun. I forced a smile, a tiny paper-thin thing. Inside, something sharp and electric was stirring, something that wasn't sadness. Not anymore. For so long I had internalized every slight, every whispered doubt, every backhanded compliment. I had worn their condescension like a second skin, pretending it didn't weigh me down. Tonight, though, something was cracking. The woman they thought they were mocking, the hopeless one, the dreamer, was standing on her own land, her own success hidden just beneath their arrogant noses. The thought should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it made me sad. Sad for the years I had wasted trying to earn a love that was always conditional. Sad for the young woman who had believed their validation was something worth chasing. Frank laughed again, a booming, careless sound that made my stomach knot. I didn't need their approval. I didn't even want it. I glanced back toward the main courtyard where guests were milling, laughing, pretending not to notice the sharp barbs my parents kept throwing. The fairy lights strung overhead flickered on as twilight fell, casting a soft golden glow over the vineyard. And somewhere between my father's words and the clinking of glasses, a new truth settled deep in my bones. I would never let them define my worth again. The laughter around the courtyard carried on, but I no longer let it tether me. Instead, I drifted toward one of the side tables, pretending to adjust a centerpiece. It gave me a moment to steady the pulse roaring in my ears. The fairy lights above twinkled faintly now against the deepening twilight, casting halos around the guests. As I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, a young vineyard employee approached, balancing a tray of wine glasses. His khaki uniform was crisp, and his cheeks flushed slightly as he noticed me standing alone. "Good evening, Miss Sharp," he said warmly, offering me a glass with a small, respectful nod. Time froze. The words were innocent, casual even, but they crashed into the fabricated world my parents had built like a hammer through stained glass. Frank stiffened mid-sentence, his laugh dying in his throat. Claudine's eyes snapped to mine, wide with sudden suspicion. Dorian, clutching a half-eaten canapé, stared at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know existed until now. I accepted the glass smoothly, giving the employee a polite nod of thanks. Poor kid. He had no idea he'd just pulled the first thread that would unravel everything. Conversations faltered nearby. Someone coughed awkwardly. The tension around our table sharpened, slicing through the festive pretense like a scalpel. Frank recovered first, forcing a hearty laugh that rang just a touch too loud. "Miss Sharp, huh? Looks like we got some VIP treatment tonight, eh?" Claudine chimed in, her voice brittle. "Well, of course, we do have connections. Family ties run deep, don't they, darling?" She leaned over and patted Dorian's arm like he was some visiting dignitary. I said nothing. I simply sipped my wine, savoring the taste, dry, bold, sophisticated, nothing like the cloying sweetness of their lies. Frank flagged down another server, puffing up his chest. "We'd love to meet the owner. Ought to thank him properly for putting together such a fine evening." Claudine gave me a pointed look, eyebrows raised. "You'll introduce us, won't you, sweetheart? I mean, you must know someone here to even get invited." The bait hung there between us, shimmering. I could have dragged it out, let them twist in the wind a little longer, but a lifetime of swallowing their condescension had sharpened my instincts, and tonight I was done playing. I set my glass down carefully, letting the faint clink ring out like a bell announcing a new hour. Then, with a calm that felt almost surgical, I turned to face them fully. "You're looking at her," I said simply. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Frank's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Claudine blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear fogged-up glasses. Dorian gawked, his hand still frozen mid-air with a half-eaten canapé. Around us, the buzz of conversation died a slow death. People turned subtly, curiosity sharpening their expressions as the tension became impossible to ignore. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere behind me. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of years slide off like a too-heavy coat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word hit like a gavel pounding a courtroom bench. I own this vineyard, I continued, voice steady. Every vine, every barrel, every bottle you toasted with tonight. It's mine. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then a nervous laugh bubbled out of Frank, a brittle, cracking sound. Come on, Lynn, don't joke about serious things. We're talking real business here, not your hobbies. Claudine forced a smile, reaching for the lifeboat he had thrown. Yes, dear. It's lovely you're working here, or volunteering, or whatever it is. I didn't blink. I own it, I repeated. I bought this land 3 years ago, built the business from scratch, while you were busy telling everyone how hopeless I was. Frank's face purpled. Claudine's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Dorian, ever the golden boy, looked genuinely lost for once, a fish flapping on dry land. You must be confused, Frank finally managed, voice tight. No bank would give you that kind of loan without… Without what? I cut in smoothly. Without Dorian co-signing? Without you approving? Without someone holding my hand? He blustered, searching for a foothold that wasn't there. It's true, I said. You never saw me, never believed in me, but it didn't stop me. It built me. I could feel the shift now, the crackle of energy changing direction. For the first time, it wasn't me shrinking under their scrutiny. It was them, exposed and scrambling. All around us, guests whispered behind napkins, through side glances they didn't bother to hide. I let the silence stretch a heartbeat longer, savoring it. And then, with a calm smile that tasted sweeter than any revenge could ever hope to be, I picked up my wineglass again and took a slow, deliberate sip. In that stunned silence, I realized the real celebration had just begun, and it was mine. The applause that never quite started died quickly. A brittle silence hung over the courtyard like a heavy mist. People avoided looking directly at me, choosing instead to glance at each other, uncertain whether to offer congratulations or condolences. It was almost comical, this sudden discomfort at a celebration they had orchestrated without ever thinking I might be more than background noise. Frank chuckled dryly, slapping Dorian's back a little too hard. Well, isn't that something? He said, his voice strained into cheerfulness. Claudine clutched her wineglass with white-knuckled hands, her smile pulled too tight across her face. Of course we always knew Lynn was… capable, she offered, the words tasting sour even as she forced them out. Dorian just stood there, blinking as if someone had hit him with a 2x4. His mouth worked silently for a moment before he shook his head and chuckled under his breath, the sound hollow. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Every second that ticked by spoke louder than anything I could have said. Guests began to murmur again, cautiously sipping from their glasses, giving polite smiles, carefully stepping around the invisible wreckage now littering the evening. Still, my parents weren't the type to admit defeat, not even when cornered. Frank approached me about 20 minutes later, while the sky had started bruising into shades of violet and gold, and the fairy lights buzzed overhead. You know, he began, clapping me lightly on the shoulder like we were old buddies. Your mother and I have been tossing around a little idea, something small, modest really. I arched an eyebrow, waiting. We've been thinking about investing, he continued, his tone casual in a way that made my skin crawl. Starting a boutique wine label, maybe. Something family-oriented. Wouldn't need much seed money, just a little help to get it off the ground. And who better to support family than… Family? Claudine appeared at his side like a ghost, her smile syrupy sweet. Blood is thicker than water, after all, she chirped. We stick together, don't we, sweetheart? It took every ounce of discipline I had not to laugh. Not bitterly, not cruelly, but the kind of laugh that comes when you realize a magician's trick is so obvious you can't believe you ever fell for it. I'll think about it, I said smoothly, draining my glass and setting it on the table with a faint click. That was it. No promises, no invitations for further conversation. Just a cold, clean end to the subject. They didn't push. Not yet. But the desperation in their eyes was loud enough to drown out the buzz of the lights. Later that evening, as twilight gave way to night and the vineyard lights painted everything in a soft, deceptive glow, I heard Claudine's voice carrying across the patio. She stood among a group of guests, a fresh glass of Chardonnay in her hand, laughing that high, practiced laugh she reserved for performances. "Dorian's been considering taking over a vineyard soon," she said breezily, waving her glass as if casually imparting divine truth. "Such a natural fit, really. He's always had the business mind for it. Probably sooner than later." Several heads nodded approvingly. No one looked my way. I stood rooted where I was, watching the scene unfold like an actor trapped in the wrong play. My nails bit into the skin of my palms, hidden discreetly in the folds of my dress. The arrogance, the sheer entitlement. This wasn't just about ignoring my success. This was about rewriting it, claiming it, acting as though my years of blood, sweat, and private victories were nothing more than a footnote to Dorian's inevitable rise. They weren't even subtle. And worse, they didn't even feel shame. I didn't confront her. Not there. Not then. I simply let the anger settle into something heavier, something denser, a decision crystallizing in my bones. No more pretending, no more second chances. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills and the first stars blinked into existence above the vines, I knew the simple, brutal truth. It was me or them, and I was done losing. As the stars shimmered faintly above the vineyard, the evening air cooled, brushing against my skin like a whispered warning. Conversations around the courtyard tried desperately to resume their rhythm, but the undercurrent had shifted. I could feel it in every glance, every stilted laugh. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt steady for the first time all evening. I wasn't surprised when Frank found me near one of the trellises, feigning casualness with every stiff movement. He sauntered over, hands in his pockets, wearing that lopsided grin he saved for when he thought he was being charming, or manipulative. "Hey, Pumpkin," he began, drawing out the words like we shared some inside joke. "Been thinking, maybe it's time we make this little venture a real family affair." I folded my arms loosely across my chest, saying nothing. "You know," he continued, shifting his weight, "might not be a bad idea to get your mother and me listed officially, as co-owners, family trust and all that. Easier tax breaks, too." He winked like he had just shared some grand secret, some brilliant scheme I was lucky to be in on. Claudine wasn't far behind, gliding over with a flute of champagne and a sugary smile. "It would show unity," she added, her voice lilting and false. "People trust family businesses more when the whole family's involved." They thought they were being subtle. They thought flattery and pressure, sweetened with fake smiles, would coax me into compliance. I met Frank's expectant gaze with an expression so blank it almost hurt to hold. "No," I said, voice low, even. Frank blinked. Claudine's hand tightened on her glass, the crystalware creaking ominously under her grip. "No discussion?" Frank asked, trying to chuckle it off, but his voice cracked at the edges. I shook my head once, slowly. "This vineyard is mine. It stays mine. End of discussion." The look that passed between them was fast, but not fast enough for me to miss. A flare of anger, wounded pride, and calculation. "Fine," Frank said, the words spat out like a rotten seed. He clapped me a little too hard on the shoulder and walked away, Claudine trailing behind, whispering furiously in his ear. I watched them go, not with sadness, but with a kind of detached inevitability. Later, as the evening limped along, Claudine's voice rose above the crowd once again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called brightly, "a quick moment, please." A screen flickered to life near the main terrace, a slideshow rolling through pictures of Dorian. Baby pictures, high school victories, college ceremonies, even corporate headshots that looked suspiciously photoshopped to make him appear taller, broader, more impressive. Slide after slide, memory after memory, but not one included me, not a single one. Around me, murmurs grew. Guests exchanged awkward glances. Some even shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances in my direction before quickly looking away. A few mouthed small apologies with their eyes, but none dared to say anything aloud. I stood still, the glass in my hand tilting slightly. The ache was sharp, surgical, but it didn't split me open the way it might have before. Instead, it crystallized into something cleaner, sharper. Claudine beamed through the entire presentation, as if daring me to react, as if daring me to break. But I didn't. I smiled, small, unshakable, and cold as marble. When the last picture faded into darkness, polite applause broke out, hesitant, obligatory. I set my empty glass down on the nearest table and slipped away from the crowd, heart steady, steps sure. I found Frank and Claudine huddled near the wine-tasting station, laughing too loud at nothing. I approached them quietly, letting my presence press against them like a rising tide. Frank turned first, his grin faltering slightly. "Enjoy the show?" he asked, too loudly. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "If you ever try something like that again," I said, voice low enough only for them to hear, "you'll regret it." They blinked at me, twin masks of confusion poorly worn. "You've been warned," I continued, my tone flat, unyielding. "Push me, and you won't just lose access to this vineyard. You'll lose any place you still have left in my life." Claudine's mouth opened. Some protest, some excuse, but I was already turning away. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to explain. The line had been drawn. Now it was up to them whether they would cross it and face the consequences. I walked away from them without looking back, my heels pressing into the gravel path, each step heavier than the last. The night had turned cooler, the faint scent of ripened grapes mixing with the crispness of approaching autumn. The vineyard lights flickered gently against the deep blue sky, casting everything in a golden haze. As I rounded the corner back toward the main courtyard, a hand brushed my arm lightly. I turned to find one of the older guests, Mrs. Cantrell, a woman my parents always fawned over. Standing there, her mouth pulled into an awkward, sympathetic smile. "You deserve so much better, dear," she said, voice low but carrying enough weight that I saw a few heads nearby tilt, eavesdropping. It wasn't kindness. It was pity. Manufactured pity. I could see the strings attached to her words, the subtle puppetry orchestrated by Frank and Claudine. They hadn't just tried to humiliate me in private. They had sown whispers throughout the party like rotten seeds, ensuring that even strangers would see me not as a woman who had built her success, but as the wounded, overlooked daughter. My fingers itched to clench, but I forced my hand to stay loose, my face neutral. I nodded politely and murmured something vague, slipping away before the tightness in my chest could break through my practiced calm. I didn't owe them a scene. I owed myself my dignity. Inside the tent where the music pulsed low and the wine flowed more freely, Dorian was holding court. He lounged casually against one of the bar stools, surrounded by a few of our more impressionable cousins and some of the vineyard's newer investors, who clearly hadn't caught up with tonight's drama yet. I was halfway across the room when I caught his voice, too loud, dripping with fake charm. "Good thing Sis had a few bucks to spare back in the day," Dorian laughed, lifting his glass in a mocking toast. "Best donation I ever got. Seriously, without that little loan, who knows where I'd be?" Laughter rippled around the small group, some genuine, some awkward, and a few people glanced at me, their smiles freezing in place when they realized I'd heard every word. Donation. As if the loan I had given him, money scraped together from my first miserable jobs, money he had begged for after crashing and burning at yet another opportunity my parents handed him, was some casual favor, a handout, not a sacrifice. I stood there for a beat too long, feeling the weight of every eye in the room shift toward me, expecting me to laugh it off, to play along, to stay in my place. I didn't. I didn't smile. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't even blink. I simply turned on my heel and walked away, leaving Dorian's punchline hanging limp in the stale air behind me. By the time I made it outside again, I had barely cooled down before Frank decided to make his own grand contribution to the evening's humiliation parade. Standing near the bonfire pit, drink in hand, he was regaling a group of guests with stories about the sacrifices he made for his children. "I could have been a partner at my firm, easy," he said, shaking his head with faux humility. But no, I chose family, gave it all up to make sure they had what they needed. He chuckled, raising his glass. At least with Dorian, it was worth it. The words struck like tiny, precise blows. Not one mention of me, not one acknowledgement of my years of struggle, the money sent home when bills piled up, the silent support that went unnoticed and unthanked. It would have broken me once. Not tonight. Not anymore. I felt something inside me harden, not brittle, not fragile, but forged. A kind of resolve that didn't need an audience, didn't need recognition. They had chosen their narrative. Now I would choose mine. I didn't storm over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand to be seen. Instead, I slipped through the party like a ghost, gathering the pieces of myself they had tried so hard to splinter, fitting them back together with a fierce, quiet dignity they would never understand. As I moved past the clusters of whispering guests, past the clinking glasses and artificial laughter, I realized something so clear, so devastatingly simple. The only way they could keep hurting me was if I kept standing in their line of fire, and that was about to change. I moved back toward the courtyard, the buzz of the party washing over me like static. The twilight had deepened into full night, strings of lights overhead casting a soft, falsely warm glow. I spotted Claudine near the dessert table, a cluster of neighbors and distant relatives orbiting her like moths drawn to a flame. She was in her element, smiling too brightly, laughing a shade too loud. As I passed, her voice lifted over the hum of conversation, clear enough for everyone to hear. "Running a vineyard is such a lovely hobby," Claudine said, a sweet poison lacing her words. "But real business? That's for the big players." A few guests chuckled nervously. Some looked at me, then quickly away, their faces folding into polite discomfort. I didn't react. Not a twitch, not a blink. If Claudine expected me to flinch, to shrink down into the role she had assigned me for so many years, the grateful nobody riding on the coattails of the real successes in the family, she was about to be sorely disappointed. Her words slid off me like rain over stone. I had built something real, something enduring, while they clung to illusions. I would not let their pettiness carve holes into the life I had fought for anymore. I moved toward the far end of the patio, where a small platform had been set up, a makeshift stage. It was supposed to be for a light-hearted family toast, a few kind words shared among close friends. Instead, it became a platform for a performance that made the evening curdle in my stomach. Frank stood tall, a wide grin plastered across his face, holding a long, narrow box wrapped in navy paper. Next to him, Dorian preened under the soft applause of a few sycophants. "For our golden boy," Frank announced, his voice booming out across the courtyard. "A little something to remind you of everything still ahead." He pulled the box open with a theatrical flourish, revealing a gleaming Rolex, silver and gold, its face catching the lights like a beacon. The crowd clapped, some out of habit, some because they didn't know what else to do. I stayed where I was, hands loose at my sides, mouth fixed in a neutral line. No one glanced at me for acknowledgement. No one handed me a token of pride. There was no slideshow for me, no gifts, no whispered congratulations for the vineyard whose grounds they now trampled without even a nod to the woman who built it. But the absence didn't hollow me out the way it once might have. It clarified everything. They didn't celebrate me because, deep down, they needed me to stay small, to stay broken, to stay easy to dismiss. Their need didn't have to be my truth anymore. Before the applause had even died down, Frank was back at it again, pulling a thick white envelope from his jacket pocket. He clapped Dorian on the shoulder roughly, almost knocking the watch off his wrist. "And here's a little something to get you started on your next big venture," he barked, loud enough for every curious guest to hear. He shoved the envelope into Dorian's hand. A few nearby guests peered over, eyes widening slightly at the visible bulge of cash. Someone gasped softly. Another person clapped awkwardly. A cousin near the dessert table gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. It wasn't a gift. It was a spectacle. It was a crown placed on the wrong heir's head, a public coronation fueled by denial and desperation. I stood still, drinking in the sight. Every false smile, every sidelong glance, every unspoken judgment hanging in the heavy, humid night air. They thought this would humiliate me. They thought it would shame me into silence, back into my corner. They thought wrong, because standing there amid the forced celebration, I felt something ignite deep within me, not rage exactly, though anger pulsed thick and hot in my blood. It was something colder, sharper, the kind of focus you find when you stop asking for permission to exist. The next move wouldn't be words, it would be action. They wanted a war. They had just declared it, and I would fight it on my terms. The days that followed blurred together. A strange, buzzing quiet settled over the vineyard, interrupted only by the mechanical routines of harvest and the occasional phone call I was too tired to answer. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter came. A thick, official envelope, stamped from the Superior Court of Napa County. My heart didn't skip or race. It simply sank, as if it had known this was coming. I sat alone at the long oak table in my kitchen, the vineyard stretching out just beyond the wide windows, golden under the mid-morning sun. My coffee went cold as I broke the seal. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Petition for guardianship, filed by my parents, claiming I was mentally unstable, claiming I was incapable of managing my own affairs, claiming, laughably, cruelly, that I needed protection. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the edges of the paper blurred, but I blinked hard, forcing everything back into focus. This was it, the final card they had to play, and they had played it dirty. I set the letter down with careful precision, the way you might set down a viper you found coiled in your hands. Then I stood up, reached for my phone, and called my attorney. No tears, no begging, just a steely, razor-edged calm. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. I wore black. Not out of mourning, there was nothing left to grieve, but out of a cold, quiet defiance. The courtroom was sterile, the air thick with tension. Rows of polished benches stretched out behind me, filled with a scattering of acquaintances and nosy locals who had caught wind of the scandal. Frank and Claudine sat at the petitioner's table, all fake concern and martyrdom. Claudine clutched a tissue theatrically, dabbing dry eyes. Frank wore a dark suit that strained across his gut, his mouth set in a grim, paternal line. I took my seat at the respondent's table, my attorney beside me, a sharp, unflinching woman named Meredith, whose calm professionalism was a balm against the venom leaking from across the aisle. When the judge, a silver-haired woman with piercing eyes, called the session to order, the room seemed to hold its breath. Frank was the first to speak. He painted a picture of a daughter too fragile to manage her affairs, prone to emotional instability, at risk of being taken advantage of. He spoke of concern and love, words that curdled in my stomach the second they left his mouth. Claudine followed, voice trembling just enough to sell the performance, describing me as isolated, erratic, in need of support. I said nothing, not yet. When my turn came, I rose slowly. Not rushed, not defensive. I opened a folder I had prepared and handed copies to the judge to opposing counsel. Bank statements, text message threads, emails, years' worth of documentation, proof of loans I had made to them, loans they had never repaid, loans they had pretended were gifts while privately mocking my generosity, proof of their attempts to siphon money under false pretenses, fake business ventures, medical emergencies that never existed, phantom debts owed to imaginary creditors, and more, screenshots of Claudine bragging to a friend about tricking Lynn into footing the bill again, Frank joking about how the dumb one finally paid off. There was an audible gasp from the back of the room. The judge's face hardened. Opposing counsel tried to object, but it was weak, flailing. Meredith was ready. She tore their argument apart systematically, citing case law, presenting affidavits from former employees who had witnessed years of emotional manipulation. Frank blustered. Claudine sniffled. But the mask had cracked, and underneath was something rotten and obvious. The judge recessed briefly. When she returned, her verdict was swift, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel. Petition for guardianship is hereby denied. The court finds no evidence to support claims of incompetence. Furthermore, the petitioner's conduct raises serious concerns regarding financial exploitation and emotional abuse. The gavel came down with a satisfying finality. It was done. I stood, smoothing my jacket, turning to face the courtroom, and more importantly, to face them. Frank looked thunderstruck. Claudine had gone sheet white. The tissue in her hand crumpled beyond use. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply said, clearly, for all to hear, "You don't own me. You never did." Then I turned and walked out. The sunlight outside was blinding after the sterile dimness of the courtroom. I paused at the top of the courthouse steps, letting it wash over me. It felt like shedding a second skin, one stitched together with shame and duty and invisible bruises. I was free. Not because they gave me permission, because I took it. The courthouse doors swung closed behind me with a final thud that echoed louder in my chest than it did in the air. I didn't look back. Not once. Outside, life moved on without a second glance at the battle I had just fought. Cars honked, pedestrians crossed streets. Somewhere down the block, a street musician was playing a lazy guitar tune that didn't quite match the storm still slowly calming inside me. Word of the trial spread faster than I expected. Napa Valley wasn't a small town, but news like this, the kind you didn't print on invitations, had a way of rippling through the vineyards and dinner parties. Some old family friends, perhaps out of habit or discomfort, clung to the old script. I overheard whispers at a local cafe. Dorian's doing so well. Such a bright future ahead of him. I sipped my coffee and stared out the window, the comments sliding off me like rain off a freshly waxed car. They didn't know. They didn't want to know. It was easier to cling to the golden boy image, to pretend the cracks weren't there. And that was fine. Some people choose blindness because it's safer than facing the truth. I wouldn't waste another breath trying to peel their eyelids open. Later that evening, as the sunset bled over the hills in molten orange and purple, my phone buzzed. A message from Claudine. "Let's move past all this, honey. It's just family drama. Nothing worth ruining relationships over. We still love you." I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling a sadness deeper than anger could ever reach. Still pretending, still minimizing, as if dragging me into court, smearing my name, trying to steal my freedom had been nothing more than a kitchen table squabble over burned Thanksgiving turkey. I didn't reply. Some silences were louder than any response. I let the message hang there in my inbox, unopened again after reading, a digital gravestone for a relationship long dead. The final blow came a few days later. Scrolling absent-mindedly through social media, I stumbled upon a public post Dorian had made. Some people just can't handle success, so they invent fake stories to tear everyone down. Family embarrassment, sad really. There it was, in black and white, no tags, no names, but everyone would know. Everyone already knew. For a moment the screen blurred as tears threatened, not because his words hurt in the way he intended, but because they confirmed, beyond any last shred of denial, that there was no going back. I closed the app. I blocked him. I set the phone down and folded my arms on the table, laying my head down for a few long, shaking breaths. Grief and fury wrestled in my chest, hot and sharp. But they didn't win. I sat up, exhaling slowly. They could throw words like knives all they wanted. I was no longer standing in their line of fire. One afternoon, about a week after the court case, I found myself wandering out into the vineyard. The sun was low, washing the rows of grapevines in a honeyed glow. I sat down on a weathered wooden bench near the edge of the property, the same spot where, years ago, I had dreamed wild dreams of success, of belonging, of being enough. The wind stirred the vines softly, a low whisper of a song only I could hear. Healing wasn't a clean, straight path. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't triumphant marches and sweeping speeches. It was sitting with the hurt. It was letting the silence answer questions you'd stopped daring to ask. It was understanding that some scars don't ever vanish, but they stop hurting the same way. I didn't have the perfect family. I didn't have public vindication. But I had peace. I had my vineyard. I had a future that belonged to no one but me. And that was enough. As the sky darkened into deep blues and purples, I tilted my face up toward the first shy stars peeking through. Some storms don't clear the sky, but they clear the path. And for the first time in my life, the road ahead was mine alone. After everything, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You are not obligated to keep toxic people in your life, even if they share your blood. Family isn't defined by who raised you or whose name you carry. It's defined by respect, trust, and love. And if those things are missing, you have every right to walk away. No apologies needed. Freedom doesn't always look like a victory parade. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's lonely. But it's always worth it. I fought for my dignity. I fought for my peace. And standing here now, I can tell you, it was the best decision I ever made. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone you loved? Do you believe blood should automatically equal loyalty? Why or why not? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your story. And hey, if this story touched your heart even a little bit, if you felt seen or understood, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Leave a 1-inch in the comments if you believe in choosing yourself. Let me know where you're watching from. And if this story wasn't quite your cup of tea, tell me why. Your feedback matters, and I want to create stories that truly resonate with you. Thank you for being here. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and most importantly, stay true to yourself. Hi, I'm Audrey. I spent $15,000 to fly my parents in for the biggest day of my life, my store's grand opening. They smiled, said they'd come, and then posted selfies from Venice while I stood alone in front of a reserved for family sign. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding out it wasn't an accident. It was planned. And it wasn't just them, it was the whole family. They called me dramatic, ungrateful, even unstable. But what if I told you? They've done this before. Would you still call it drama, or would you start to see the pattern? What really happened behind the smiles, the comments, the family first posts? Let me show you. I had rehearsed that morning in my head for weeks. How I'd greet each guest, how the floral arch would frame the entrance, how Mom would cry when she saw the sign that read, Audrey's Bloom and Company. I even imagined the sound of champagne corks popping when I walked my parents over to the reserved row, the 3 seats I'd marked with gold foil name cards, Mom, Dad, and Gypsy. But by 11:15, those chairs were still empty. By noon, the catered lunch had gone cold. I kept greeting guests with my best store owner smile, snapping photos with old clients and new neighbors. Everyone kept saying, "You must be so proud." And I nodded like my stomach wasn't twisting itself into knots. Each time I turned toward the front row, I saw nothing but polished wood and 3 untouched flutes of Prosecco. It wasn't until I slipped behind the cash wrap to check my phone that it really hit. Mom had posted. She was standing in front of some pastel-colored wall in Venice, holding a glass of Prosecco with a sun hat perched too carefully on her hair. The caption read, "Sometimes memories mean more than milestones. Family first, always." Underneath, Clyde had commented, "Let her enjoy it. A flower shop isn't real success anyway." That's when my knees weakened. Not from surprise, from recognition. This wasn't new, just louder. Back when I booked the flights, 15 grand business class, I thought I was doing something special. I remember calling the airline to request low-sodium meals for Dad and emailing the itinerary twice to Gypsy because she's always losing her inbox. They'd said thank you. They'd hugged me. Gypsy even joked, "Wow, we're getting the first-class kid treatment." But now, with one Instagram caption, they'd erased all of it. At 2 o'clock, after the last guest left, I stepped into the back storage room. The cool air from the florist fridge hissed against my skin. I sat down on the tile floor, tucked between boxes of wrapping paper and unused ribbon, and stared at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I opened my phone, pulled up the airline confirmation, and scrolled. Their tickets had been booked 3 months ago. Then I cross-checked with the Santorini flight on Mom's post. Booked 2 weeks before she ever RSVP'd yes to my invite. They said they'd be here, while already planning to be anywhere else. I flipped open my planner, the one with all the handwritten goals and sticky tabs. There it was, inked in red, March 30th, opening day, 11 a.m., they promised. And that's when my forgiveness died. I didn't leave the shop right away. I couldn't. The flowers still smelled like effort, like hope, like someone who thought $15,000 bought love. The sound of the last door chime still echoed in my ears as I wandered back to the front counter, unsure of what I was looking for. Maybe answers. Maybe just a reason not to feel so stupid. I opened Facebook again, even though I knew better. The screen loaded slowly, like it too didn't want to show me what came next. There it was. Layla had posted a new photo, this one of her and Dad standing near a canal in Venice. She wrote, "Family moments like these are priceless. You can't replace real presents with shallow events." And just beneath it, Clyde had doubled down. "Let her enjoy it. A flower shop isn't real success anyway. Real work pays rent." 42 likes. Names I recognized. People who'd eaten at my table. Cousins who still owed me money. My godmother, who once said I was going to change the world. Their approval came cheap, just a tap of a screen. It wasn't just their absence anymore. It was mockery. Public, smug, intentional. And they weren't done. Eh? Clyde hadn't just commented. He'd shared the post into the extended family group, captioned it with a cherry on top. "We chose real life over petty parties. Family is more than flowers." Someone else replied, "She always was dramatic." I didn't respond. I just started saving screenshots. Every comment, every like. Not out of rage yet. Out of habit, out of necessity. Then I made a folder on my phone and titled it, Receipts Public. A text came in from Rachel, an old college friend. "Saw what your uncle posted. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long minute before replying. "Not surprised. Just disappointed by how loud silence can be." Even then, I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was documenting. People love to call it drama when it's not their name being dragged. I scrolled through the post again and stopped at one particular like, Aunt Melissa's daughter, the same girl I used to babysit when I was 16. I remembered reading her bedtime stories, staying late when her mom worked night shifts. She had liked the post, the one that called my dreams shallow. I zoomed in on her name, heart hammering but steady. "They've been shaping this story for months," I whispered. "But so have I." I shut my laptop just after midnight, but sleep never came. My mind was still scrolling through names, through likes, through words that didn't belong to strangers, but to people who'd once sung me lullabies and promised me the world. By morning, the rain had settled in. A soft drizzle kissed the windows of my apartment, the kind of gray that makes you forget what joy ever looked like in color. I didn't open the shop. Instead, I sat on the edge of my couch, phone in hand, staring blankly until the screen lit up with a new message. It was from Anne-Marie, my cousin. "Hey, are you okay? Aunt Layla said you didn't want us there." Attached was a screenshot of the family group chat I hadn't been a part of in years. Layla. She made it clear it'd be awkward. Said she wanted real friends only. Another message followed. We didn't want to ruin her moment if she was trying to impress her business crowd. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just read it again. They weren't ignoring me. They'd rewritten me. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I never drank, then grabbed my laptop. With a few clicks, I pulled up my Dropbox and opened the folder labeled Store Launch 2024, invoices, flight confirmations, guest list PDFs, printed RSVP forms, and the email I'd sent Layla, time-stamped and polite. "Hi Layla, just finalizing the guest count. You, Mom, Dad, and Gypsy are confirmed for front row. Let me know if you need parking details. Excited to celebrate with you." Her reply? "You're so thoughtful, Odd. We'll be there front row. Can't wait." I remember when I saw that heart emoji, I smiled. Back then, I thought it meant love. Now I realize it was a bandage over a bullet wound. 3 weeks before the launch. That's when I sent the email, and they were already packing sandals and sun hats for Europe. It wasn't just betrayal, it was performance, a facade dressed in manners and emojis. I clicked back to my desktop, created a new subfolder inside Family Receipts, and named it. They said I never invited them. Then I dragged the screenshot from Anne-Marie in. Next, Layla's RSVP, then the launch guest list. Click, click, click. Each file like a nail, sealing the lid on a coffin I didn't build, but would bury. They've been shaping this story for months, I whispered again. But let's see who's keeping track now. Morning came with a chill that didn't belong to spring. The rain hadn't stopped, and neither had the tight coil in my chest. I left the store closed and sat at the dining table, coffee untouched, staring at my open laptop. I pulled up a file I hadn't opened in months. monthlyfamilysupport.xlx. It started simple. Gas money for Dad when he couldn't make it to his specialist appointment. A few hundred for Gypsy's college books. Then it snowballed. April 2022. Clyde. $500. Just for rent short-term. You're doing well now, kid. July 2023. Layla. $1,200. The heating bill's overdue. You don't want your parents cold, do you? October 2023. Gypsy. $3,800. Dental emergency. I'm in pain every time I chew. That last one stung worse than the others, because 2 weeks later, she posted a photo with a frozen cocktail captioned, "White teeth and white wine in Mykonos. Blessed life." I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't accuse. I just dragged the image into a folder called Receipts Emotional Theft. Over 3 years, it totaled $38,400. No contracts, no repayment, just guilt-tripped generosity wrapped in family language. I pulled out a pen and scrawled across a manila folder. Trust transaction. The irony? Every time they asked for money, they said it with love. You're the successful one, Odd. It's not a big deal for you. You're doing great. Don't act like we haven't always been there for you. But when I needed them, on the one day that mattered, they vanished into a European backdrop. It was never help. It was harvest. Every dollar I sent, they pocketed with one hand and passed shade with the other. I kept scrolling until I hit that entry, Clyde's $500. I remembered the call. It's just for a few weeks. I'll figure it out after. He never said thank you, but he did like the comment that said my shop wasn't real success. I sat back and whispered to no one. It's time they see the balance sheet. 4 days later, I walked into the private dining room like I wasn't the one they'd all laughed about. I'd booked this space weeks in advance, when I still believed this dinner would be a celebration. Instead, it became the setting for a reckoning. The staff had set the long table just as I requested. Crisp linens, name cards, a small folder at every seat. The projector was mounted behind me, discreet, quiet. A calm before a storm they didn't know was coming. I wore black, not for mourning, for clarity. Layla arrived first, in pearls and perfume like nothing happened. She kissed my cheek as if Santorini hadn't replaced my grand opening. Look at you, sweetie, a whole businesswoman. Then came Gypsy and Lyle, fresh off a red-eye flight and full of jokes about gondolas and overpriced cocktails. Lyle chuckled. Next time, you gotta come. Venice was something else. I smiled thinly. They didn't even glance at the screen behind me. Once they were all seated, I stood. Thank you for coming, I said calmly. I know it's been eventful. Layla sipped her wine. We're just glad we could finally get together. I nodded and clicked the remote. The screen lit up. No title, no introduction, just numbers, bank transfers, dates, captions. Gypsy's dental emergency overlaid with her cocktail grin in Greece. Layla's heating bill matched to her wine-tasting weekend in Napa. The Santorini post blurred behind the empty reserved seats from my store opening. Silence hit the room like a brick. Then came the audio. Clyde's voice through my phone speakers. She thinks we'll just keep clapping. She doesn't realize she's just our retirement plan. Lyle's voice. He always pays. Laughter followed. I looked at them one by one. No yelling, no trembling, just truth. This dinner was supposed to be a celebration, I said. But instead, it's a courtesy. One chance, one table, one projector. Gypsy opened her mouth. I raised a hand. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to document. You chose applause in Europe over presents in Portland. I walked to the end of the table, picked up the final folder, and placed it beside Layla's glass. This was your one chance for truth. You traded it for clout. Then I looked at them, voice steady. Do it again, and I'll stop showing up polite. The next morning, I was still wearing the same black outfit. It wasn't out of drama. It just felt accurate. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee when the buzzing began. Ping, 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 texts, tags, DMs, the kind of digital noise that doesn't feel accidental. One stood out, Rachel again. Are you really suing your mom? Audrey, what the hell? I blinked twice. Suing? She sent me the link. A GoFundMe. Title, Help Our Family Heal from Betrayal. Goal, $50,000. A sun-drenched photo of Layla in the header, arms wrapped around Gypsy like they were the ones who'd been left behind. The description was a masterclass in delusion. Our daughter turned her back on us after we supported her dreams. Now, she's using wealth to destroy her own blood. We're just trying to heal from the pain. It didn't stop there. Comments poured in. She used money as a weapon. Money changes people. She needs help, not applause. Some of the donors were people who'd eaten at my table, smiled at my launch, toasted my champagne. I scrolled lower, and there it was, a leaked message from Gypsy's group chat. We just need to control the narrative. She'll burn out soon anyway. Control the narrative? I stood up slowly, not out of shock, but precision. I'd been waiting for this, not for revenge, for clarity. I called Jonah, a friend from college, now a corporate lawyer. Write the takedown, I said, today. Then I opened my browser and typed in a domain I'd quietly purchased last year. TheCostoffBlooming.com. I uploaded everything: screenshots, bank transfers, voicemails, audio files, PDFs of RSVP emails, even the file called "They said I never invited them." If they wanted to rewrite history, they'd have to bury the internet first. Then I went back to the GoFundMe page, clicked donate, entered $1. Under comment, I typed, "The doctor's still not real, huh? Enjoy the receipts." I barely slept that night. Not because I was anxious, because I was calculating. By sunrise, TheCostoffBlooming.com had hit over 100,000 views. My phone buzzed nonstop, but I didn't pick up a single call. If it wasn't from Jonah, it wasn't worth my energy. Friends texted, "Girl, you're trending." "Audrey, this is insane, but powerful. You've done what most of us are too scared to." I didn't smile. I wasn't there yet. Layla's friends started commenting under the fundraiser, asking questions. One asked if I'd really sent over $30K in gifts. Another pointed out inconsistencies in the story. By noon, someone messaged me from New Jersey, my cousin, Emilia. They did the same to my sister in 2018. Said she was unstable when she refused to lend Clyde money. We didn't speak for 3 years. That's when I added a new tab to the site. Family pattern screenshots, messages, even blurred out testimonies from relatives who didn't want their names used but needed their truths told. By evening, Gypsy's Instagram vanished. Clyde hadn't posted since my gallery night. Layla, silent. I wasn't done. Lyle emailed, "Can we talk privately?" I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote an open letter and posted it front and center on the homepage. This isn't revenge. This is a record. I've spent years protecting people who never protected me. I've been your cushion, your wallet, your scapegoat. No more. If you want a new story, earn it. I'm done being your public shame shield. The comment section exploded. By 10 p.m., the site had 250,000 views. People I didn't know were sharing it. Wedding clients, old classmates, former neighbors. They didn't share it for gossip. They shared it because they'd been me. Then came the email. Subject line, interview request, The Morning Horizon Show, national syndication. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened a fresh document and whispered to myself, let's take this national. By sunrise on April 9th, I was already dressed. Black turtleneck, no makeup, hair tied tight like I was walking into court. Because in a way, I was. I sat at the dining table with a neat stack in front of me, legal envelopes, notarized forms, delivery receipts. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. The first document was an official eviction notice for Gypsy. The house was legally mine, though no one ever treated it like that. Every time I reminded her it was temporary, she rolled her eyes and said, "We're family." Today we were contracts. Then I closed the joint account I shared with Layla, the one she claimed was just in case of family emergencies. My lawyer confirmed, they no longer have access to anything you own. You're clean. Clean didn't feel like peace, though. It felt like frost. Necessary. Sharp. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Why are you doing this to us?" Layla's voice was tight, rushed, almost cracked. I leaned against the wall. "I'm doing this for me." "You're tearing this family apart," she snapped. I didn't flinch. "You did that the moment you sold me for sympathy clicks and fake prayers." She went quiet. Then the line cut. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked down to the mailbox, sent the documents via certified delivery, watched the clerk stamp the date with finality. Later, back home, I refreshed Gypsy's Instagram. A crying selfie. Captioned, "When even blood turns cold. No names, no truth, just performance, as always." I didn't read the comments. I opened my podcast page, Real Bloom, and uploaded the teaser for episode 1, The Price of Being Your Family. I clicked publish. The tab closed. I exhaled. Then I checked my mailbox. Inside, a single card, pale yellow envelope, no return address. I opened it slowly. 5 words, handwritten in black ink. We miss you, M. 6 weeks later, the stillness of my new townhouse felt earned, not empty. I rose early as usual. The maple tree outside my kitchen window was fire red now, its leaves catching the morning light like slow-burning embers. I poured a single cup of coffee, watered the bonsai by the sink, and opened my laptop. Real Bloom, Episode 1, 2.3 million streams. Ad revenue, $14,037. Every cent had already been transferred to a scholarship fund I named after my grandfather, the Edward Simmons Creative Futures Award. He was the only one in my family who never made me feel like love had a price tag. I didn't receive any new messages from Layla, Gypsy, or Clyde. Their silence, for once, was honest. Clyde had tried to file a defamation suit. The judge dismissed it within minutes. Public figures by their own making. Gypsy moved to Arizona. Layla's last social media post was a blurry sunset and then, nothing. Sometimes, I drove past the house I used to call home. The shutters were now blue. Kids' scooters lined the front walk. A chalk drawing on the sidewalk spelled out "Home" in bubble letters. They'd replaced the old black mailbox with a blue one. I smiled. On my desk sat the yellow card again, the one that said, "We miss you. M." There was no return address, no apology, no signature. I walked out to the back patio with it in hand, dropped it into a steel bowl, lit a match. It curled, smoked, and folded into itself, quietly, completely, not out of anger, just release. Back inside, I shut the patio door behind me. The house held only what I chose to keep now. On the wall above my desk, I'd framed my floral business license next to a certificate from the podcast platform. Underneath, taped to the wall, was a sticky note I'd written weeks ago, when all of it still stung. Real doctor. Real done. As I reflect on this journey, I realize it wasn't just about confronting betrayal. It was about choosing myself, even when I'd been taught to believe that my worth came from others' approval, from endless sacrifices that only led to more disappointment. Life isn't a transaction, no matter how many times it feels like we're being asked to pay for someone else's mistakes. The lesson here is simple, but powerful. You are enough, just as you are. You don't need to prove your worth with money, with endless giving, or with tolerating disrespect. And most importantly, don't let anyone's silence or their hurtful words make you feel invisible. It took me a long time to realize that peace isn't something others give you. It's something you create for yourself by setting boundaries, standing up for yourself, and letting go of the toxic cycles that have defined your life. And sometimes that means making the hardest choice, letting go of people who don't truly see or respect you. It may hurt, but in the end, it's the only way to heal. I want to leave you with this question. What do you need to let go of in your own life to find your peace? What boundaries do you need to set to protect your happiness and your worth? If this story touched you, if you found inspiration in it, or if you're ready to take a stand for yourself, let me know in the comments. Drop a 1 if this story spoke to something inside you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel so you can follow along for more stories, real talk, and inspiration. Because there's always more to learn, and together, we can grow stronger. Until next time, remember, you are in control of your story. Don't let anyone rewrite it for you.